So, welcome to the Outside Insights podcast. My goal is to provide content and ideas that can help you close your personal and professional gaps, frankly, by hearing how others have done it. I'm your host, Chris Burkhardt, and today I'm thrilled to have Raymond Lee on the show. Welcome to the show, Raymond.
Chris, thank you so much. It's great to be here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on Outside Insights today. You're one of those guys that I've known for 5 minutes forever. Yet, when we have dialogues, I feel like we spend a lot of time together. We tend to be mind melded and interested in a lot of the same things and think similarly. So, hopefully you agree. But I'm excited and respect the heck out of you, and really appreciative that you would share your journey with my audience.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. The feeling is certainly mutual. I remember the last lunch we had, campus of University of Delaware, and I feel like the check came and we kept talking for like another couple hours. And it was just like, yeah, every time we get together and we talk about the work that we're doing, I feel like it's like we inspire each other. We've read each other's books. And so happy to continue the conversation here today.
That's what I figured, that it would be just like we're having a lunch where the check sits there for a couple hours. It's just, I hope 62,000 people that don't delete me will get a chance to listen to this, Raymond. Like, that's the idea. But I mean, you've got such a great story, a career that started in human resources. You chose an entrepreneurial path. You built a tech business in human resources maybe before it was as common as it is today. You scaled the thing, and now you're running a global, outplacement business with Careerminds. It's a wonderful story. And then, of course, you're right. We what I should say to the audience is that we handed each other's books and said, read this. So my hope is we'll probably share a little bit about that. And of course, you're an accomplished podcaster as well. So all that's going on. What are you up to today? Bring everybody up to speed with what's going on with you right now.
Yeah, I appreciate that context setting. It's been a great journey. As you mentioned, grew up in HR. And what I'm up to today is I'm on the other side of having sold my company 2 years ago and continuing to run the company today, but also, trying to think about like what's next. And, you mentioned the podcast, but, it's really sort of thinking about, what's the next thing going to be? And so, still running the company today, loving the work, loving the team, and having a great time.
Is what's next the strategy of where you see your marketplace going? Like, what's the next use of, is the next value add related to what, an internet delivery of outplacement is, or is it just even broader than that?
Well, honestly, let's keep this super quiet. I don't want my boss to
Uh-oh.
hear
Yeah.
that, I'm thinking about my next thing. But, like when you're wanting to be intentional about your career, it just doesn't happen overnight. And so while, the business is great and, we're continuing to grow and things are going well, and, I would be remiss to think not to say that I'm thinking about like what is the next thing going to be. I've been doing this work for almost 17 years now, and while I love the work, I oftentimes wonder, what that looks like. And while I don't have anything to hop off to, I think that this whole journey of having conversations with you and networking, really starts to get the juices flowing about what's happening in the world of work and so forth. So it's what consumes my mind.
I'm not surprised. Raymond, you may have even done this original referral to me, and of course we'll get into your book, but someone recently sent me the book, The Second Mountain,
Hmm.
and it's been pretty substantial. Just, conceptually, you think about, you climbed your first of many mountains with what you do, and it's very natural to think about the next climb. And that's not just work, it's not just career, it's life, family, community, all those things. So I just kind of like the imagery of that, it's very fitting. But it's also speaks to the fact that you climbed the first mountain. I think that's an important thing. It's hard to think of the second one when you're halfway up the first. At least that's how I think a little bit about it.
Hmm.
So we can go in a lot of different directions, but one of the most common questions I get from guests are like, the startup story. So if you'll humor me, it could be, what was your inspiration? What was the gap you saw? Or just, frankly, tell the story the way you'd like, of just kind of how you ended up deciding to build Careerminds, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I, growing up in human resources, I had a fantastic career. I had two parents who were entrepreneurs. My mom started a court reporting business. My dad started an insurance business. So ever since I was a young kid, I always had this like entrepreneurial, sort of like you grew up in an entrepreneurial home, and it was like this fire that was always sort of brewing inside of me. And it was around 2007 when I decided that I was going to leave working in a corporate HR job and go out on my own. And I can't remember, Chris, if I shared this part of the story with you, but I actually started the business as a recruiting company in 2007. I went to the company that I worked for, and I was working in HR. I knew all the HR people. It was a chemical company at the time. And I asked them if I could do their recruiting, and they said yes. And so I started the company Careerminds in '07 as a recruiting business. Well, in 2007, the worst business to start is a recruiting business.
The only time worst was 2001, because that's when I chose to do it. But,
Yeah.
I'm going to first plug Raymond's book is Clocking Out, a Stress-Free Guide to Career Transitions. I think you tell a bit of that story in the opening there,
Yeah.
just a touch. And
I touched on it.
but truth is, guys, when you start a business, your job is you've got to sell stuff. As stark as that sounds, you've got to find customers that want you to do something. And then over time, you clarify, if you're lucky as an entrepreneur, to what customers want. You find your market, you get your idea, and I'll hand it back to you on that.
Yeah, I can't agree more. And in this particular case, it was recruiting. I was, working for this company. I was doing all their job search. I ended up picking up a couple of new accounts when I was out there selling, doing recruiting. Well, October of 2008 hit when Lehman Brothers announced the collapse of their bank. And, obviously we went into one of the biggest recessions of the century. And overnight, every recruiting project that I had evaporated. And I literally, Chris, I thought that this is it. I'm going back into an HR role. I was going to brush up my resume. It was over. I literally had that conversation with myself.
And it's
And that,
not such a morbid thought, because unless you went through it, it was a very dark tunnel. It was a very dark recession. It stuck around a while too.
it stuck around a while. It impacted, you had a number of things happening. I remember you had the subprime mortgage crisis that ultimately led to a lot of legislation, but it sent the housing market into a recession. The financial markets, the government was bailing out banks. Like it was probably a 4 to 5 year recession before things started to come back. And I was sitting there in my office one day, and all of my cell phone rang, and it was an account that I was servicing. And the company and the person with the company said that our company's going bankrupt. I said, join the club. I'm hearing that consistently. He said, but we have about 6 executives who are going to be let go here in Delaware, and was curious if you can help them find a job. And I said, outplacement services? He's like, yeah, I guess that's what they call it. And that's where I pivoted and changed the direction of the business. And that was in 2008 when we completely rebranded, updated the website from recruiting to outplacement. And that's where Careerminds Outplacement was born in 2008.
Did you have the notion it was going to be tech driven at that point? Or was it just more, I'm going to serve these executives and just figure it out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I was sharing an office with a software developer. He was a Brit with a great accent, and his name was Ray. And he, he said to me, "It's great that you're going to continue at this business." And I said, "Yeah, how am I going to meet with these people? They're here locally. I don't have enough office space." And he looked at me and he says, "Office space?" He said, "Do it virtually." He says, "Why in the world would you go out there and create a bunch of office space?" And I said, "That's brilliant." I said, "But I need to build a platform." He says, "That's easy. He's like, just hire a person to build a platform and then do it over Skype." And at the time, there was no Zoom or, it was Skype and WebEx, I think, GoToMeeting. And so, needless to say, we were just super early, way ahead of our time. But from the beginning, it was pretty apparent that opening offices and trying to compete with the two big competitors out there, Lee Hecht Harrison and Right Management,
Yeah.
and trying to open real estate to meet in person was not going to be cost effective in terms of scaling a business during this recession. And so it was the right decision. Now that we're sitting here today.
And I think for context, this was a time where global companies were doing, outplacement contracts where they were saying you have to have an office in Moscow, for goodness sake, right? Like
Right.
it was a strange, you know, so to go in that direction, I mean, obviously today it seems very normal in the virtual world that we work in and hybrid schedules and all
Yeah.
those things, but just so ahead of, well, that's the beauty of it, right? The market. How long did it take the market to catch up with you?
Yeah. It was 2013. So it was, what is that? Six years later, we we broke even in terms of being profitable. We had to raise venture capital. We recognized that it was going to take a long time. HR are not typically risk takers. And so while we had some early adopters through the recession who signed up for the virtual outplacement delivery model, we knew it was going to be a long road to get the market to really shift to being virtual. But I would say it was probably around 2013. I would say 2015 was when we won our first big enterprise account. It was Highmark Health out of Pittsburgh. And we took market share from one of our competitors, and we still have that business today. But that was around 2015 is when we won our first market share movement account.
And of course, you've never looked back. It's always interesting to hear that founder's story. Your opinion: harder to scale it, or found it. Which was the tougher part of it, and why?
Well, as I think about your question, I think the the launching of a company is is hard because of the uncertainty of whether or not it's going to be successful. Like you think about, I just remember when I had my business cards from Vistaprint with my new, CEO Careerminds title on it. I was just coming off of a role as like an HR manager for a manufacturing facility. And so leaning into your identity as a new business owner with the uncertainty of whether or not it's going to be successful, I feel like is tough in and of itself. But it is tricky with scaling the business as well. And as a CEO, a founder who's launching their first company, there's a lot of things you just don't know. And raising capital played out to be a really strategic decision that ultimately benefited me because I had some really smart investors and mentors who kind of taught me every aspect of scaling along the way. If I didn't have that team, that board, that was the hot breath on the neck every time I had to meet with them every 6 weeks, I had to give them an update and be open to feedback and what I'm doing right and what I'm doing wrong. I don't know that I would have survived.
You bring up a really good point about the entrepreneurial side of this. Founder accountability. We start our businesses to get away from the man, even though we are the man, right? I mean that in quotations, and that we need a process and we need a communication rhythm. And goodness gracious, we need accountability.
Mm.
And having it's one of the things I think about is, I self-funded Raymond, which has its own advantages. I keep the equity, but it took me, I guess it was about 8 or 9 years ago, maybe 15 years into my journey before I started a board to hold myself accountable in that way. Like, and it's such an important part of it because I don't think we lie to ourselves, but we certainly can control the narrative a little, right?
Mm.
Um, and there's this idea of the second decision. The first one, as a founder, we take the risk to deal with starting the business, but the second is to have to become what you need to become to actually do it. The founder passion is one story, right? You land some accounts, but to become a president and scale a real business, I think it's even different than being founder. So
Mhm.
I've come to the conclusion they're both hard. But working for very little in the beginning, the constraints we put on ourselves to birth a business, of course that usually wins, right? That's really hard stuff.
It is. And I think as it scales, the accountability to the team, to your employees, I feel like starts to weigh on you as well. When you start building out your team and you have employees and families, they really count on you to bring a level of commitment to the business that demonstrates that you're in for the long haul. Like, this is no longer a hobby. This is people's lives that you're dealing with. And I think once you start going through the cycles of business and you're faced with potentially having to conduct your own layoffs where times are tough, it really pressure tests uh, your leadership skills, when things aren't going so well. And so that accountability starts to really take shape over time, which I feel like is equally tough than just scaling.
Raymond, I'll be vulnerable. I remember in the early days, those founder employees, the ones that could all gather around the first cubicle, they all pulled me aside and said, Chris, we know the risk you're taking. Hey,
Mm.
we know it's your last dollar. Hey, we know that you scrimped and saved for 5 years to launch this thing. It's why we're here. But please stop telling us directly and indirectly that, that you've taken this risk. And some of the best advice I ever got in those early days, I couldn't, I thought I could control that, but it does, it does hit you in that regard. It
Mm.
really does. So, you know, a change is a constant, Raymond, right? Whether we're talking an entrepreneurial story or careers, I think you've got some really great methodologies that you use around career transition. I think it would be a gift to my audience if you talk a little bit about, some of the ways that you approach that. I could read the words, but, if you're comfortable, would you give that gift of a little bit of your thinking about transition?
Mm. Absolutely. Yeah. So if you're referring to the point of just um, the career transition and the process of being separated from your company, whether it's through a reduction in force or restructuring, I I've sort of come up with this model that incorporates four principles that I
That's,
live
yeah,
by every
Raymond, that's
day.
exactly what I had in mind. So perfect.
Yeah. So I come up with this success model that I call the career success model, and it's four principles. It's choice, mindset, agility, and trust. And it starts with making a choice. Choice is an action. Every day you wake up, you have a choice of what you're going to do when you go to work, if you're going to go to work, what makes you happy, unhappy. You have a choice. And so if you're thinking about making a change or you're faced with a layoff in particular, as a person, like, you have a choice that you can make a change. And then the mindset, agility, and trust are three behaviors that you can sort of shape. And so I
Hey,
live by
real
those
quick
every
on
day.
real quick on the choice. I mean, my experience is obviously I'm at the same intersection, the same 20 years, right? And the
Hmm.
number of people that have sat in front of me that would rather suffer and stay than go through this feeling of, changing the status quo, like that choice is bigger than it's hard to change now for the thought it'll be better later. And, I think a lot, that's where we can collaborate. Like the number of people that have declined to go in an interview that my firm has represented because they just couldn't move off of where they were, not judging, just saying how hard it is
Yeah.
to choose. So I think you're right that I'm not sure people realize they always have a choice. What did Steve
Yeah.
Jobs say? That if he looked in the mirror too many days in a row and hated what he did, he had to make a change.
Hmm.
So back to mindset and agility and trust. But I think that's a big part of this and getting
Yeah.
people to work through that.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. And I think for those that lose their job and they're
Mm.
faced with the transition that lies ahead, I have this tagline that says career transition should be stress free. And I say that because um, if you think about like you're in a job, you haven't been laid off yet, but in your mind, you ask yourself the question of what if tomorrow I was laid off by my company? Like if you actually said that to yourself at some point while you're working, what would I do? Then the choice that comes after that is going to be much easier because you've already sort of positioned the fact that change can happen any day. There's nothing constant. We could be gone tomorrow. We could lose our job tomorrow. I think a lot of people, what's interesting is they're like, they have bucket list or when I retire, these are all the things I'm going to do. We should have a layoff kind of question where if my boss walks into work tomorrow and I'm laid off, I should think of that as a gift because the company is presenting me with an opportunity to make a choice to ultimately decide what I want to do. I think oftentimes people think of being let go as a negative, and that's what connects to the mindset. It's really how do you view that next step? And so that's where the stress free comes from. Like it's all about how your mindset going into it.
In our early years, Raymond, we're encouraged to risk, color outside the line, see how high you can jump, try the new thing. But over
Mm,
time, those that love us tend to want to hug us, right? And, Raymond, you can't start that business. You don't have enough money for that. Or, you've never done that before. And I know these are things you and I have chatted about before, but those that love us create the constraints and, the rules and the culture that we're used to. It's hard to break that. And I don't know, you bring up a great point about that question. If my boss came in and said my job were gone, I just would like to create an environment where people think about the very facets of their life a bit more. There's a lot of those questions that we should be asking, right?
yeah.
You know, but that's a different thing. Um, I keep interrupting. Do you want anything you want to add about the other three steps?
Yeah, so it starts with a choice. So, right, you want to be super intentional about your next opportunity, right? Like if you're an entrepreneur and you have an entrepreneurial mind and you want to start a business, you have to be willing to make the choice, right? So, the next components I've factored into my whole journey, right? Like mindset is really around being willing to make mistakes, having a growth mindset. You recognize that you're not going to have all the answers. You need to take risks. You're not perfect. You're going to learn from the things that you're doing. And I have to say, you've been doing your podcast for quite some time now, and I'm sure how you showed up in the first episode is very different than how you're showing up today. You probably felt like I remember when I started my first one, I was like sweating. I was like incredibly nervous. I was worried about what people are going to think about me. And then you get, several episodes into it and you're like, wow, this is actually not so bad. And so the
Yeah,
mindset is just so critical in terms of how you find fulfillment in really what matters to you.
Raymond, would you say mindset is knowing your personal culture? Am I taking that a little too theoretical on you? It's like, so it's just realizing, is it knowing yourself or knowing you're going to be imperfect in the process? Maybe it's both.
Yeah, it's both. And I think where people get fixed is getting to a place of complacency where they think they've reached the highest point they'll ever get to.
Understood. That helps. I mean, that's a mindset too. It's just maybe not a productive one.
Right. It's like, I'm not worthy. I'm not capable. Like, I'm not capable to start a podcast. I'm not capable to launch a company. I don't have the skill set. Well, absolutely. Okay, maybe, maybe you can't run a marathon in a sub 2 hours. There are certain physical limitations that you have to be realistic. But when it comes to work, I
Yeah.
think anyone can really do whatever they want,
Well,
really.
we're absolutely on the same hymnal because I was going to use the word limitations. Those limitations are what life hands us, right? Our own experiences. It's how
Yeah,
friends and family and community shape us. So I think that's hard. It's hard to overcome our self-imposed limitations. But
right.
any entrepreneur talking to another one had to do that to start it.
Yeah.
You've earned the right to say it.
Yeah. It's quieting the voice in your head that says you can't do it. And I was actually just telling someone, if as an entrepreneur, if you come up with a good idea and it's a really good idea, a lot of times people will not really understand why it's a good idea because they've never heard of it before. That's like, I'll give you an example. There was a woman who, this woman that I was just speaking with, launched a company called Greet Her, which is essentially a company that meets women travelers in cities that they travel to, like Morocco and Budapest, right? Women in general don't like to travel alone. And so there's
Wow.
a community of greeters who will greet a single traveling female in a country that's considered to be an unsafe country that they want to go to. And they're like their tour guide when they get to that country. So it sort of creates a safe way to travel. Well, it's kind of like Airbnb was another one. So many people, investors passed on that because they said, who in the world is going to share their own personal home with a stranger? It's like there's so many of these ideas that you may say that's just such a crazy idea, but it's the crazy ideas would ultimately change the way we live, the way we work. And so I feel like, people have to quiet that voice when they're thinking about sort of leaning into whatever it is they want to do.
I think it's that markets change so much that, at the time you're thinking that's a silly idea. It might be, but the evolution of the way the consumer operates and business operates and the pressures to be competitive open new markets at a record pace. And
Yeah.
that's easier today. When I started, I felt like markets were like paint drying, but today
Mhm.
it goes so fast. I think it's easier to get. Uh, Comment about agility.
Yeah, so agility is just recognizing when things just aren't working the way you want and you need to make a change. It's like the Einstein quote of insanity,
Yeah.
doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different outcome. And just having the vision of recognizing that it's time to make a pivot. So I was working in recruiting, the recession hit. I mean, that was a very eye-opening um, kind of economic force that was standing me right in the face. That's like, hey, this company is not meant to be a recruiting company. It's meant to be an out. And quite frankly, Chris, I give you uh, ton of respect and kudos for the success you've had in recruiting because, it's a tough industry. You talked about how at the 11th hour that candidate changes their mind or their family changes their mind and you've invested so much. That was the one thing that drove me crazy about working in that industry. What I love about outplacement is you're taking someone at a low point when they are feeling really down on themselves and you're building them up to helping them land in something else. Like for me, I just love the feeling that you get when you can help someone see the pathway and the process to something that is beyond what they ever imagined. And so, but recognizing that it's time to make a change, and then the trust is trusting the process, which is the hardest one. When you tell someone that's been laid off from a job, just trust the process, you will look back and say, I am so much better today than I was before I was let go. Or even starting a business, not knowing the outcome or not knowing if you're going to succeed or not. If you work hard and you really make good decisions and you do the right thing and you're authentic, success will come. And so it's really trusting that you don't need to know the answers to everything right then and there. That's the hardest part, I feel like.
So a quick comment, Raymond, choice, mindset, agility, and trust. We'll have show notes. So Raymond, I'm sure you've got something that you'd like to, sort of wrap this up in a bow with. We can drop a link or an article or anything that you might have on that if you're interested. Make sure we get that out. And just a quick rewind, you're very kind on the thoughts about me, but that same 07-08 time, I actually was in the recruitment outsourcing business, and I pivoted to survive back into temporary staffing because all my contracts said, we're not going to hire, but we need flexibility. We need contingent labor costs. And, I fought that probably just like you did and thought, no, I'm in this boutique, recruitment outsourcing business when in fact, listening to the market and going with it, it is hard, but it's many times bigger than that thing was that I set aside. And you don't lose those ideas. My sense is your recruiting and human resources chops create kind of a broadness to what you've built that I think it shows that you know more about the space you're serving. So I bring that managed services stuff to staffing, and it makes sense because it's what I knew.
Yeah.
But all I'm suggesting is that you're hearing that most of us in our business had to pivot several times, and it won't stop, right? It won't stop. At some point, there'll be somebody that competes with online outplacement and finds a way to do it better, faster, cheaper. And it might be you, right? But that's the way it is. I'll pause there. We talk covering the right things that messages you'd want to get out to the audience.
Yeah, this is great. I love the conversation, just like kind of riffing and just following your lead. I have to tell you, when I got that email, I think it's Amy, and she's like, "Hey, here's a list of the questions." I was like, "Holy shit, there's like 25 questions on here." I literally just like skimmed it, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to show up. I've known Chris for a long time. It'll be fine. Like, I'm not going to prepare anything other than so.
No,
This is great. Like you know your audience better than me, and I'm happy to just take this wherever you want and you find value. So it's really less about me trying to like get something out versus just making sure that I'm connecting with what you're looking for. So, whatever you think, my friend.
So that makes it really easy then. Maybe 4 or 5 more questions. I think is really we can make sure we get everything out that I think makes sense. One would be the other thing I hear quite a bit of feedback on is folks' journey as a leader. I hope you're comfortable in that genre, but just talking a bit about your evolution as a leader, and maybe a mistake or two you made would be great.
Yeah.
Or wins, or if that's your thing, but
so I talked about a little bit earlier around the hard decisions as a leader when things are going well and everyone's sort of rowing and going into the right direction, things are going well. As a leader, it's easy to lead. When things aren't going well or you're faced with adversity, it's hard. And I'll tell you, Chris, in 2021, when George Floyd was murdered, and we had the civil unrest that started to take shape in the country around protecting um, protect having racial equality around the country. I had my team came to me and says that they said we're going to participate in Black Lives Matter, right? The social movement that really took shape online on Blackout Tuesday, and I sat there for a moment. And I said, is this something that we really, as a company, should we be getting political, and should we, I just don't know about this, and I've never really been in a tough situation like that before. And I had a handful of employees who said, if we don't participate in Blackout Tuesday, I don't think I can work for your company.
That's the perfect leadership moment, because you weren't the only one trying to process without time to do so.
Yeah, this is before we sold. I had investors, I had a board. I was not the 100% owner of the company anymore. I was less than 50% at that point. And so, I was sort of wearing this kind of like the corporate business hat, but then also at the same time, I was trying to be empathetic with the team and sort of their feeling about what's the right thing to do. And ultimately, we participated. We posted the black box on our LinkedIn profile, our Instagram profile. We posted hashtag Black Lives Matter. And, we sort of stood behind corporate, companies and brands who were taking a stand for racial equality. And, um, and there was a big lesson there for me that your employees have a voice, and just really sitting back and just sort of thinking about like what's right for the company, what's right for your employee, what's right for humanity. And it really tested my sort of leadership skills at that point. And that was a really defining moment for me, and the employees really appreciated. We ended up, Chris, after we hired a diversity consultant who came in and had, kind of diversity conversations, DE&I sort of conversations around the value of recognizing differences amongst employees. And we had some really good conversations amongst the team, a small team at that. But we didn't just, for me, I didn't want to just say, hey, we're going to post this black box and put out there to the world that, you know, Black Lives Matter, we're supporting the movement. But we really, for me, I was like, we need to take action and take it a step further. And we did that. And I think employees of the company really appreciated the investment we made. A consultant was not cheap. And it really strengthened our culture as a company. And so I'm really proud of that, I'll be honest.
I think you should be. I contrast that with my own experience that I tried really hard to gather knowledge and information, and we read books as a company, and, we met in small groups and, worked with an external consultant. But in the end, I don't know if I did enough, Raymond. And I'm willing to say that out loud. I did. That's what's so interesting. I mean, leadership is decision making. That's why this is okay to talk about. I chose a path. You have to live with that path. But I think I could have and strive to do more, It makes such sense. You just allow this thought. I mean, Placers is in not a global company. We're very Delaware centric, but we're in the lobbies of most small, medium, and large Delaware companies.
Mhm.
And we have a hell of an opportunity to influence a lot of people and a lot of things around that. So we've made it more a part of our culture today. I was just so concerned about putting out a statement that I couldn't fulfill on something I didn't fully understand. I wish I had done what you had done. For example, like, there's a couple of big brands that said they were going to give a lot of money, and I've seen a lot of articles that they never actually gave the money.
Mhm.
I think that's bad for your brand.
Yeah.
I didn't want to take advantage of a moment, right, to sell stuff. But I
Right.
love the topic that you're talking about, and hopefully doing it honor and justice, because that's very vulnerable and very real, and a hell of a story.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's one that I'll always remember, and
I'd work for you.
well, I appreciate that.
How about that? Um, what books have your attention today? Just kind of go a little lighter here for a minute.
Yeah, of course. So I don't read books, I listen to books. So I listen to
Okay.
Audible, and on the business side, let me think. Holy moly! So right now, I'm on the personal side. I'm listening to Matthew Perry's autobiography, which is really fantastic. Such an interesting story. Um, Let me think. Oh my gosh, you really just
Well,
got, and I, hold on, give me a
that's
second.
all good. And obviously the other thing is we can drop them into as well if you think about them later, but I'm giving you some time here.
Oh no,
Um,
it's good. So autobiographies, I've listened
yep.
to Shoe Dog by Phil
Oh, what
Knight.
a book. Oh, what a
It's
book.
amazing.
Whether you wear
I,
Nike or Adidas or whatever, you want to talk about a story of overcoming and starting a business. Wow. I want to go buy
so
a pair of
amazing.
Tiger. If I could find a pair of Tiger running shoes, I would,
I know. That's such an
Uh,
inspiring. Another book I read that's listened to that's really great is The Violin Conspiracy. It's a fictional book that it's pretty cool. And then on the business side, I have listened to Think Again by Adam Grant, which
yeah,
I feel like is so great.
I read that 5 times. I just
Yeah.
kept coming back.
Quit by Annie Duke is a good one. I like Annie Duke because she's a former professional poker player, but now
Okay.
she's written a couple leadership books. That's pretty
So
good.
between you and I, Raymond, she's on my top 100 list to have on the podcast. So, hey, Annie, if you're listening, and Raymond, you put in a good word for me, right?
There you go.
I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, that's great.
So, a couple of other thoughts. One of my favorite questions is advice you would give your 21-year-old self. If you want to
Hmm.
change your age, you can do it, to whatever age you'd like to give the advice to. But we'll start with advice you'd give your 21-year-old self.
Wow, that's a tough one. My 20s weren't my 20s were not my favorite decade. And I would say give yourself some grace. I think about my kind of where I was, had a lot of crazy stuff happening. I talked about my dad going to federal prison for mail fraud, and I was 21 years old when I drove him across a couple states to take him to a federal penitentiary in Florida. It was probably one of the hardest things I had to do, and not that I felt responsible for it, but it certainly impacted the early start to my career when I was starting, and I was really
That's
hard on
a lot of
myself. And
pressure on a young man.
oh, it's crazy! It's so crazy. And so I would say that the advice would be to there are things that are going to happen in the world that you just don't have any control over, and know that anything that happens early on as you kind of navigate forward will have an impact in a positive way. The struggles that you have as a 21-year-old will build character into
I
what
would
you
just like
become
to look
later in
like I
life.
did when I was 21, Raymond, just setting that aside, just to be
Yeah.
vain for a minute. Wouldn't it be nice to be, have a body that doesn't hurt, right? And all that stuff.
Oh my gosh, absolutely.
It wouldn't be a bad thing. So
Yeah.
you got you have a great story. You know, Sometimes I think people perceive success, and they know it's obvious through your story how hard you've worked to get there. But one thing that I find my audience is curious about is, so whether you call it life hack or self care or your daily routine, Have you mastered any of that? Have you thought about, have you come to any conclusions of how you have your best day and how you approach it?
Yeah. So I started CrossFit a year and a half ago, and
Thought you looked pretty well.
I
I
was
thought you
going
were
to a
looking pretty
gym.
well. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I will say, like, I'm knocking on wood. I've had my share of injuries and aches and pains over the years. I'm 52 now, and I joined this CrossFit gym January of 2023, and it was one of the best things I've ever done. I go every morning almost every morning when I'm traveling. I don't usually work out, but my class starts at 6:30 in the morning. It's an hour long. It's a great community. I see the same people every morning. The workouts are great. I don't push myself, but I just couldn't live and be productive and and sort of function at this age without having some form of exercise in my life. And so
Okay.
it's how I start my morning, and it definitely impacts. I'm a person of discipline, person of routine, so I think it's important to have that in your life. But exercise for me has been key to my day.
I appreciate you sharing that. Uh, I think the way we start businesses and the way we do it are different than how we do it at 52 and 54 and 56 and 57.
Hmm.
You can't pour from an empty cup. And I hear you saying that regimen is really important to you having the energy for your community and to feel good.
Absolutely.
It makes sense. So that brings us to time, brother. I don't know if there's any closing thoughts or anything you want to leave the audience with, but it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. I think you've been vulnerable as I knew you would, and it's just like every other coffee clutch conversation we've ever had.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. I feel like this has definitely been that extension of that lunch that we had, and I know we don't um, live too far from one another, and I look forward to having lunch again. But this has been great. I feel like I love having conversations like this because there are moments when you're sharing your story and you're just engaged in like such a great dialogue where you connect dots, and you get perspectives and an appreciation for the journey and where you become. And I feel like it really is, it's gratifying to, like, we're very privileged individuals. And when you think about the struggles that some people have, I mean, it's like just so grateful for everything that I have. And so I appreciate the opportunity to share the journey, and it's great to see you. And yeah, thanks.
So I'll wrap with this. You mentioned that what it's like to get on the podcast the first time, the nervousness, the butterflies, the sweating, etc. And I think you're right. But this was my pandemic project, if you will.
Mm,
And it was this overwhelming sense that I needed to help people. So I do have this regiment where I probably take 2 or 3 deep breaths in and out. And I just have that mantra that I'm only doing this to do good, period. And that because whether it's entrepreneurial or life and careers, the stuff, Raymond, that you and I are trying to overcome and master for our privilege are where the struggle is for most.
yeah.
So the fact that they're able to hear you say that you feel privileged and that you've overcome and made this happen, I think that builds confidence in people who are starting their journey or thinking of trying to make a choice. And
Yeah.
we'll leave everybody on that notion of choice.
I love that.
A few years back, I started Outside Insights really as a platform to do good. The pandemic was raging. It was a time of confusion, angst, and it kind of triggered some creativity where, for me, I was constantly spending time with either entrepreneurial business clients or the workforce. And there were problems with people not necessarily being where they want to be in life. So the irony is Outside Insights and my book Opposite the Crowd, which I co-authored with my dad, Alan Burkhardt, were kind of born together, as Alan was some of those early guests. And those guest shows turned into chapters of our book. It was an audiobook first. It can be found anywhere you listen to audiobooks or listen to podcasts. It's out in both. But I did want to share for those of you that are interested in reading our story. And there really is some great stuff about helping you have the life you want, helping you work on leadership or master change. There's some great stuff in there. And that book is now available. It's available in a hardback from Amazon, and the Kindle as well as Audible versions are up. And I ask that you just, you're on Amazon anyway, ordering stuff for the house. Check out Opposite the Crowd and let me know what you think. Thank you.